Hey guys, what's up and welcome to another edition of Cash Game Cornerstones for MLB for Thursday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo. I'm your host, Steve Repsold at Slurve. If you played cash games yesterday, I hope you did all right. I personally didn't really play a whole lot, a couple of little GPP shots here and there because I really didn't feel too comfortable with things as I mentioned yesterday. But some of the picks were still good, so hopefully you listened and went with Matt's in the earlier slate, and hopefully Sanchez didn't do too bad for you in the late slate. You did all right. Anyway, let's move right along to today's slate. We got a lot of stuff going on, even though it's a weird Thursday. That's not a real split slate. We're not doing the two early games if you're watching this early, so forgetting those. There's really three guys that I'm interested in at pitcher today for cash games. And that is DeGrom. He's pretty much unfadable. I mean, I don't believe in the concept of must plays, and just the fact that I'm saying he's unfadable is probably a good reason to take a shot on fading him in a GPP. Although I was chatting with Max at the Slurve chat room earlier this morning, and he was saying that he didn't really think he was unfadable even in GPPs, that he'd rather, get the 20 to 40 points there and make up the difference somewhere else. So DeGrom is a really good option. He gets San Diego in a good ballpark. 11.4 on DK, 10.8 on FanDuel. He's a little bit expensive, but it shouldn't really be a problem to fit in anywhere. I don't think, especially if you go on DK with the next guy that I'm going to recommend, Adam Conley. A little bit nervous recommending him against Arizona, but great ballpark. I think he's a really talented pitcher. I think he's the kind of guy who we could see his salary go way up over the course of this season, kind of like we've seen with Vincent Velasquez so far. He is dirt cheap, 6.6 on DK, 6.8 on FanDuel. On DK, I absolutely love DeGrom and Conley together. I think that's just a great combination. And then there's also Kyle Hendricks against Washington. He's a little more expensive on DK, which is where I'd really prefer to play him, because if I'm playing cash on FanDuel, I'm personally locking in DeGrom and not thinking twice about it. But he's only 7.2 on FanDuel, so he's really cheap there if for some reason you need a cheap option, but I don't recommend saving on pitcher today. And if you do on DK, where we need to, I really like Conley. We saw Washington yesterday put up something ridiculous like 12 runs, so their offense might be starting to click a bit. Hendricks is a good pitcher, but DeGrom and Conley, my top two options. At catcher, I'm going to stick with the Marlins game and recommend Real Muto, especially if he's still hitting leadoff as he has been. He's been really good the last couple of games since moving to the leadoff slot. Gets Robbie Ray, is a lefty, so that's good for him. 3.5 on DK and 3 on FanDuel. Reasonably priced at both sites. LaCroix gets Alfredo Simon, which is a really nice matchup. And he is a little expensive on DK at 4,000, but he's only 3.3 on FanDuel. Really like him there as a cheap option. And there's also, if you need a cheap option, well, not that much cheaper, but Toronto has been hot, and Russell Martin is getting back to his old self. He gets a lefty at home in Derek Holland, who's not a bad pitcher, but lefties against the Jays in Rogers Center are typically vulnerable. Vulnerable. He's 3.4 on DK and only 2.2 on FanDuel. FanDuel with the real bargains on catcher. But Real Muto is probably Real Muto and LaCroix are definitely my top two options, with Martin coming in as a salary saving thing, or if you want a cheap way to get exposure to the Toronto game. First base, I love Crush Davis. I think he is going to have a nice game here against Tanaka. I kind of think Tanaka is an overrated pitcher. Baltimore offense is a scary thing, and he's really nicely priced at 4.2 on DK and 3.9 on FanDuel. It's really cheap price for a guy that has double dong upside on any particular day. I also like Ortiz. He gets Johnson, and he's 4.6 on DK and 3.8 on FanDuel. So on FanDuel, he's really attractive at that price. On DK, a little bit less so, but you'll probably have money to spare. So if you really prefer Ortiz, I don't have a problem going there. And then, it's almost never a bad idea to play Anthony Rizzo. Rizzo! Plus, it's just so fun to say Rizzo when he hits a home run. But he is really expensive, 5.2 on DK, 4.9 on FanDuel. But, he's the kind of player that can definitely pay off that salary. And, even going up against Joe Ross, which is not, he's not a bad pitcher. I think Rizzo is the kind of guy that can eat him alive, though. And so I think he is a really safe play, but on the more expensive side. Second base, I like Odor. They're kind of giving him away on DK at 3.7. He's a little pricier at 3.9 on FanDuel. He gets J.A. Happ. It's a lefty versus lefty matchup, but Odor is actually a bit of a reverse splits guy, so that's not really a bad thing. Also, man, on FanDuel, they are just begging you to play Robinson Cano. He gets some guy named Davinsky, which gives you an idea of what I think of his pitching ability. Cano is just really expensive on DK, 5.1, but it's only 3.9 on FanDuel. I can't really see myself going another way on FanDuel, but if I did, it would be Altuve, who is also just being given away at 4.2 on FanDuel. He keeps hitting these leadoff home runs pretty much every time I don't roster him. So, maybe I won't tonight, and he'll do it again. Come by this Slurve chat, and I'll let you know if I've decided to roster Altuve or not, so you know if he's going to hit a home run. 5.3 on DK, he's just really expensive there. 4.2 on FanDuel. I like him there. I like Cano, and DK I really like Odor. Third base is a spot I really like to get the exposure to the Toronto game, which is projected to be high scoring and, a lefty against the Jays at home. So Donaldson, always one of the safer plays on the board. He's been a little cold, as the Jays have in general. Personally, I'm just hoping that drives ownership down a bit. He's 5K on DK, so you'll have to spend up there. 4.6 on FanDuel, so pretty much equivalent. Good play on both sites. Going back to Baltimore, I also like Machado. 4.3 on DK, 4.2 on FanDuel. So if you need to save some money on DK, it's definitely a good place to do it. And then on the cheaper end of things, if you really need to save money, going back to Texas with Adrian Beltre, he's only 3.9 on DK and just this silly price of 3.1 on FanDuel. If you're needing to save money, that's a place you can do it. Though I personally prefer to save money somewhere else and pay up there for Donaldson, probably, or Machado. Shortstop, there's really only two guys I'm interested in, with a third sort of interested in. The first off is just an underpriced guy, especially on DK, Carlos Correa. I've talked about Houston a little bit earlier with Altuve. I assume they'll be really popular tonight since I think 16 runs is what it ended up at last night. It was such a killing that I lost track after a while. So Houston will probably be popular. Correa's 4.3 on DK, 4.1 on FanDuel. They're just handing him out on DK. Tulo, again, going back to Toronto, they're giving him away everywhere. He has been really cold. In the chat, we were saying, oh, he looks really lost at the plate. I don't know. He's Troy Tulowitzki. I think he gets it right sooner rather than later. It's a good opportunity to do so today. 3.8 on DK and just a bargain, 3.3 on FanDuel. One of those two guys are your safest options, although I really kind of like Addison Russell going up against Ross. he's definitely a place, especially on DK, where you can save money at shortstop. 3.2 on DK. He's the same on FanDuel, so relatively more expensive there. I wavered about recommending him, but I looked at his game log, and he hasn't put up a goose egg in the last 15 games. So since, we're looking for consistency here in cash games, that's pretty good. I've definitely gotten goose egged by a lot of more expensive, better players, including Tulowitzki, very recently, which is not something to say that recency bias, blah, blah, blah. But, 15 games without putting up a goose egg is pretty nice. So for that kind of price, if you're spending up at first base and third base and you want to save at shortstop, I don't hate going with Addison Russell. Outfield, we got a few more guys than the other positions. You need 3 of them anyway. So I'm going to recommend one of, or both of, honestly, but Conforto and Granderson from the Mets going up against Colin Ray. Bad park. Ray's not a terrible pitcher. Granderson on FanDuel 3.2, handing him out. 4.6 on DK, so I would kind of reserve him for a GPP stack. But reasonable. Kind of the opposite on Conforto. He's 3.9 on DK, 3.9 on FanDuel, so relatively a much better value on DK. I like getting one of those in your cash lineups, probably depending on which site. Adam Duvall has had home runs 2 days in a row, which I called the first one with the old Dong Finder model. I'm working on this new model that's been pretty good at predicting home runs so far. I share those picks in the chat during the day. They're not safe picks, so I don't include them in this video, but they're definitely interesting, and we've been getting some pretty good results. Odubel Herrera was one of the top calls yesterday, and top rated guys yesterday, and he donged. So anyway, moving on. Duvall 3.5 on DK, much cheaper. 2.8 on FanDuel. I like him, but I don't. Well, no, I mean he grades out really well. I do really like him, especially on FanDuel at that price. Speaking of prices on FanDuel, Adam Jones 2.6. I'm sorry, FanDuel, but you don't do that. Adam Jones, yeah, he's been cold, although he only has one goose egg in his last 15. 2.6. He should bottom out at 3 max. Getting back to Toronto, Saunders, if he's leading off again, is not a bad way to get exposure to this game. 3.4 on DK, 3.4 on FanDuel, like him better on DK. And then I also really like Ozuna going up against Robbie Ray. Ray's a left-hander, and Ozuna's been hitting them really well lately. He's much cheaper on DK on FanDuel at 3.4 than his 4K on DK. And then one more in Houston. Springer is again cheaper on FanDuel, 3.8 there. He's 4.5 on DK. Definitely more in play on FanDuel. But I like some combination of those guys for your outfielders. And that's pretty much it. It's kind of a slate that I really rather like, in that I personally am not torn on pitching options, and I think that leaves plenty of salary to get the hitters in that I want to. So it's a slate that I'm happy about playing cash on. I hope it is for you too, and I hope that you do well. Good luck. Come on by the Slurv chat, slurv.com. It's free to sign up. We got lots of banter and discussion going on throughout the day as a bunch of baseball nerds talk about baseball and daily fantasy sports. And it's just a good time and a good way to get the updates, since things do change throughout the day. Once again, this has been Cash Game Cornerstones for MLB Cinco de Mayo edition. I'm your host, Steve Repsold, and I will see you again tomorrow.